Hello all. My name is Grandpa Klee. And oh my, would you look at how late it is? It's time for bed. But first, here are some stories for you, you weirdos.
Well, gather round, young gentlemen, and I will tell you a story of a laser rifle of some repute, which disappeared a long time ago in the land of the Commonwealth, also known as Boston, Massachusetts, but somewhat different from our timeline. But anyway, listen, what you got there is a big old school that got buried underground for 100 years, and they ended up making some guns, which were pretty alright, I guess, if you like having giant big plastic boxes in your fucking vision that don't do shit for damage. But anyway, we had once upon a time a young man who worked there named Calhoun, which I don't know how he got that name. It was very unlikely. But anyways, he ended up coming up with a gun that, while it fired through the air doing almost no damage whatsoever, it ended up pulling some metal fragments out of the atmosphere, which turned into perfectly formed razor blades as they shot through the sky along with the laser rifle. And that laser rifle did therefore fire razor blades that were manufactured with nothing more than the power of light and our imagination. While it didn't do very much damage in by itself, and he actually got fired from the Institute for gross incompetence when he accidentally shot that laser rifle right into the face of our boyfriend Virgil. He ended up going to the surface and being killed almost immediately by a Protectron Devil. That Protectron Devil was later killed by Klee, who ended up taking that gun and shoving it right under his armpit because it felt good. And one day he attacked a boy who was walking down the street in a big old fucking suit of power armor, and he killed that Deathclaw and took that gun. And that is the story of how a wounding legendary razor-firing kind of laser weapon automatic rifle pistol thing came into the hands of a boy named Nikola Tesla. And that is the story of the automatic laser rifle. So I'll tell you the story about this here darn legendary leather poisoner's leg piece, or whatever the fuck it is. Anyway, you can see here I keep it in the bottom shelf for good reason. It's so I can protect my screwdrivers from snake venom. I'm just kidding, but really, I do, because you see, there are snakes under this dresser that I keep there for such an occasion that you're a bad boy and I need to punish you. So, this here leather leg piece is essentially almost pointless as far as it goes on the surface, but the truth is that this poisoned leather chest piece is a very thick piece of leather that has been infused with snake venom and therefore counteracts it in a way that doesn't make sense to modern science. Anyway, I done got this off of a snake-bit jaguar who ended up crying all night. And before he died, I swear to God, he learned the English language. But he did die, and his last words were, "I would like some donuts, I swear to God." But I cut his back off, and I made it into this nice little calf piece here to protect from all manner of low-hanging poisonous fruit, if you know my meaning, which I think you do, because you are a very smart boy, and I like to take care of you very much. Well, anyways, you can go to bed now knowing that this poisonous lead piece is strapped to the bottom of this dress to protect you from snake bites and all manner of what-all from being in your sock drawer. And if you hear hissing, you come tell me, and I'll put that leg piece on and I'll kick the shit out of those snakes for you and your family. Good night, son. I told y'all to go to bed. I even put a legendary bullet blop blop in the bottom of your sock drawer to protect you, but you seem to be awake and still excited. Well, if all that bourbon I gave you didn't put you to sleep, maybe this here legendary story about a legendary wounding machete will make you feel better. You see, once upon a time, the human race invented a kind of a flat piece of metal with a handle on the bottom and sharpened at one end. And it was for, you know, cutting down sugar cane and grapevines and whatever hell all stood in your way and shit. But unfortunately, somebody began to use those devices to attack their common man, which was a no-no in all forms of the ethical systems that we've developed as a human race. But together we've overcome all of our violent ways, and the machete is back to being a tool and not a weapon in most countries in the world. But in this country, where the nuclear bombs have destroyed God near everything, it turns out that occasionally a sharpened piece of flat metal is exactly what the fuck you need to make sure you're going to be okay. Well, one day a boy decided he was going to take that flat piece of metal and sharpen it a little bit more than a normal person would sharpen his machete, and the wounds that came off of that machete were ever so gently more dangerous. And that is the story of the legendary wounding machete. At the head of a raider gang named Bajillion Jones and the Raider Thrones. I didn't tell you, did I? Well, that's okay, because it could be made up, but the truth is we have evidence of his existence, namely the tiny pieces of shitty scrap metal that he used to strap to his leg when he would go from place to place demanding gold and food. He and his raider gang used to rove the streets looking for any kind of friendly family fun, or possibly murderous nightmare land, where they would come together as a group in order to drink the blood of their enemies and sacrifice people to a god that they didn't quite understand or believe in. Well, one day he decided that he was going to upgrade his gear, and especially to be able to protect himself from the certain enemies that he feared most, which was, weirdly enough, bugs and super mutants, who are by default not that scary. But the thing is, you forget about blood bugs and mirelurks, which all fall into that category, and they are especially afraid of their own reflection. So he decided that he would take the eye level at which bugs would normally attack him, which is to say, where his legs are, and he would polish them to a mirror shine, in order to defend himself from the bugs, who would normally be fairly afraid of something like that. The super mutants, on the other hand, were another matter. See, they were very tall and were not afraid of their reflection, and so it didn't appear that that kind of defense would be at all helpful in a leg guard type scenario. But he didn't have any other armor, so he had to use his imagination to come up with something slightly better to defend himself with, and he ended up coming up with a tiny piece of a saw blade that he would gut them right across their Achilles tendon in order to make sure that they could not follow him. And that is the story of both the Exterminator's Raider right leg and the Mutant Slayer's Raider left leg. Did I ever tell you boys about the time that I went to Atlantic City and I met a boy who would never lose a dice game no matter how well he thought he was going to not do? He still did good, and I don't know how to describe it, but turns out that what he had on hand was a tiny piece of construction material, which he alternated back and forth on his arms and switched dice rolls to the other side so that occasionally it would look like he lost some. But otherwise he could just hold that button down as much as he wanted, and he would never ever lose a dice roll, no matter what. Well, one day he got killed in a knife fight for winning too many dice rolls in a row by a guy whose name was Mulligan Jackson Aloysius V. And he took that combat armor and wore it in a combat, as it so it was called, and he would actually use that arm to fire his pistol. But one day he was so unlucky that he actually broke the luck of the lucky combat right arm, and the pistol backfired and blew his bottom fingers off. And he had no choice but to retire, and he put his combat right arm in a safe in a box at the bottom of a well, where it was somehow discovered 2 days later, magnificently, by a pearl diver who was bored one day and ended up finding it and digging it up. And here we stand, looking at this lucky combat right arm, and we have to ask ourselves, what is luck? How can this small piece of fiberglass and material end up influencing luck? Is luck even real? Well, I dare you to wear this thing and see just how lucky you are, my son, but I don't think you can have it because you're too small. But I'll put it in a box with the other bullshit till you grow up. And that is the story of the lucky legendary combat right arm. Now it's a lovely new day here. We're all hanging out talking about some of the new stuff that I found the other day. Came up with some great components of the history of our world that I can tell you about. This here wounding board came from the inside of a haunted church that belonged to the Puritan founders of our state who all once told their pastor that there was only one woman in their whole congregation who had developed the powers of a witch, and being the extremely fair and formidable people that they were, they burned her at the stake and they scattered her ashes in the floor of the church in order to try to purge her of her witchy ways, but it did not work because this was the only time in the history of the witch hunts where they were absolutely right. And her magical powers infused with the wood of the church floor, they only were powerful enough to create a tiny nail to stick up every now and again. And lo and behold, those boys came down there with the hammers and they nailed that nail back in, they bent it over, then pried it out, but there was always a nail sticking out there for some young choir boy or whoever to get his foot stuck on, and he would get a little bit of a stab in the bottom of his feet. And oh my God, did they have such trouble with that church until finally they decommissioned it, tore it to the ground, in order to try to rebuild it in Hampton, Massachusetts, where they left that one boy behind. And as the nuclear fire destroyed our entire planet, that boy went flying up into the sky and landed smack dab in the inside of a subway system where one day in the future, a boy in a suit and a hat decided to pick it up and carry it around in a fit of complete and total malarkness, which did not have any rhyme or reason tied into it at all. And he did not understand the power of the magical board, and he ended up dying with that board tucked into the back of his pants in a very uncomfortable pocket. And that is the story of the wounding board. Heard the story of that wounding board there, but you didn't know that there was also in the same place, and totally miraculously and against all odds, another piece of legendary equipment which we also have discovered, and we put up there in the Legendary Museum for all to see. This here leather chest piece doesn't actually look much like armor, and you would be surprised at how many lives it saved. The truth is, it used to be a piece of chest equipment that people would wear in a type of sport that was not even popular in our country called cricket. It was a leather chest piece that the, catcher derivative of cricket would wear, and he would catch that big old ball that would go sailing through the air. But he once upon a time decided that if he stopped washing his chest plate, that it would slowly become more lucky and he would have a better chance at holding those gains or whatever the hell they do in that sport. We don't really understand what baseball was like, but we do know that cricket is even more inexplicable and confusing. They would often stop and take tea breaks, and he would take the tea leaves and rub them into his leather chest piece because he also believed it was lucky. But little did he know that he was actually performing an ancient and spiritual rite of some very confused people who were summoning a dark god to protect them. Well, he once upon a time forgot that he was gonna keep washing that thing, and not washing that thing, so that he could slowly manufacture actual luck, which is another thing which we as human beings don't understand or know about. And he accidentally wore it out in the rain, where the horrible All-Father Odin cursed him for using his lucky leather chest piece to rig the games, because Odin was a fan of that sport at the time. And so he was electrocuted right there on the field, and that leather chest piece blew off him in all directions. But slowly, people began to gather those pieces back together in order to honor his memory, and when they all decided that the chest piece was more or less complete, as far as they could tell, they were shipping it to a cricket museum in the New England that they had out there, and basically what happened was while it was in transit, the world died in nuclear fire, and we all ended up finding that thing strapped to a crazy ass suit-wearing Nazi mall that hung out down there at the time, and when he died not wearing it, but only keeping it in his back pocket in a very uncomfortable way. And that is the story of the legendary lucky leather chest piece. Let me tell you something about the legendary steadfast, powerful 10mm pistol. It was once a steadfast normal 10mm pistol, but it was fixed up by a boy who later on became a horrible glowing ghoul, who we now can say with all assurances is dead. killed by the mighty Nikola Tesla with his electro cannons. Anyways, before he was a ghoul, he was a merchant of the armor trade, and he used to travel the Commonwealth trying to find people who wanted to survive a little bit more than everybody else. Well, it turned out that was a pretty good business, and he had some time on the side and some materials on the side to create a kind of gun that when you pointed it out at somebody and you looked right down the barrel, the gun would somehow know to extend a tiny little silver shield that would protect you in all cases. It was alright, let me tell you. It was actually the same amount of damage resistance that you would get if you were tough, which we know you're not because you're a small boy. Anyways, that old man, he made that gun and he used it for many years to keep himself safe. It was very hard for him to look down the barrel of that gun and also get hit by ghouls and things, but he turned it into a kind of Viking shield and sword technique. It was pretty brilliant, but one day he still died, and he died near enough to a radioactive barrel that he slowly turned into a horrible glowing dead ghoul creature thing. And he lived down there in the Filagreen Estates with that boy Maxwell, who always brings us the mail, which, if you see that boy, tell him I'm waiting for my mail. But anyways, let me just say that since Nikola Tesla killed him and took that gun, he ended up just selling it because it was goddamn worthless. And that is the story of the steadfast, powerful 10mm pistol. Right at the exact instant of two bombs going off simultaneously, a shock wave of radioactive nuclear energy made contact at the exact moment where Joe McGillicuddy was about to shoot his wife with a 10mm pistol that he got into service. What happened was, at that exact moment, a quantum particle field that existed in a place outside of time and space created a bit of a pocket universe inside of Joe McGillicuddy's gun, and he ended up having a great glimpse of what the universe's beginning must look like right before he and his wife were vaporized, which was a bit of a, good news, bad news situation for McGillicuddy. But anyways, that gun did not get annihilated. Instead, it actually became a kind of envelope of a tiny universe where all things that are 10mm related were all connected through a kind of fifth dimensional vortex, which I can't really describe to you right now, but basically, it's like a square, only it's turning in on itself in all directions all the time, and basically the thing is, the gun doesn't run out of bullets, is what I'm trying to tell you. I don't know why, that's very unlikely, but that's exactly the case. Well, anyways, it put off so much energy all the time that them good old boys down there in the Institute, they picked it up on their little beepers and whatnot, and they went out there with some synthalots, and they found it. Right as they were about to bring it back for analysis and they ended up being intercepted by Nikola Tesla, who found and killed every single one of those synths. And then one of their horrible turrets shot him to pieces, and he died heroically. Well, here's your. I mean, the pistol was crazy. Allow me to illuminate you, my young squire. There actually is a laser rifle out there somewheres that generates its laser energy by drinking down on your biometric battery, just like in the fucking Matrix. If you ever seen that show. You probably don't, because it's over 200 years old, but once upon a time there was some science fictionians that came up with some bullshit about computers using human beings as batteries, which is the most nonsensical asinine garbage who ever thought of it. So anyways, what happened in the long term, or maybe even you could even say in the short term, is that the people at General Atomics, right between bong rips, came up with a great idea for a battery that would come off of a gun that would slowly drain human beings of their own life essences. And while you think that that's a stupid idea, let me tell you, there's much worse out there. Anyways, what would happen is, the gun didn't get stronger as a result of you being faster or smarter, but what it would do is, it would pull all your energy directly out of your frontal lobe, which would give you elevated brain activity, and this would increase your ability to hit your target. The damage wasn't any higher because a person is a person, and you can only lift so much. But anyways, this old laser rifle would focus your mind to such a degree that it would be like being the laser beam, and it would be easier to hit. But it would also take something out of you, something we can't quite define. Anyways, while they were testing it down at Fort Hagen, the world ended, and now that gun is lost to time. We'll never know what happened to the Stalker's laser sniper rifle. There'll be something about a good old boy whose name was Buffalo Bill. When he died in a place where it was what do you want to call it, a casino or a saloon or whatnot, and he was playing cards and somebody shot him, and then one day they picked that saloon up and moved it across the street. God knows why, but the board that he was killed on stayed exactly where it was, because when he fell down after being shot, he was impaled by a tiny piece of a nail that was sticking up. And it went right through him, and nobody knew why, but they were afraid of that board, and they began to be fearful of it, and they had stories about it. And they left it right where it was and built a hardware store right on top of it. And today, after that hardware store was knocked off its ass by a giant nuclear bomb, somebody came along and they found that board still stuck right in the mud there. They picked it up and it moved quite fine, just like Arthur and the Story of the Sword or whatever the fuck. And it turned out that the board had magical properties as a result of Buffalo Bill's death, where he fell and died. It was infused with the soul of his shooting gun, and he would put them right through armor, or right through an eyeball, or who knows what all. And now he's got penetrating powers, locked secretly inside of a piece of wood, which one legendary synth sorcerer found and began to tinker with until he was killed trying to defend his master, Kellogg, whose first name, by the way, is fucking Conrad. And Tesla killed all three of those boys and took that board upstairs, where he left it on the floor somewhere because he had no need for such an object. The haunting of it was too much for him to bear. And that is the story of the penetrating board. Two Raider boys that had their missile launcher, they worked for a Raider whose name was Danny O'Green, which is a very strange name, but it makes sense in Boston if that's where you live, and indeed that is where these people lived. And Danny O'Green ran a Raider gang who was convinced that he was the most intelligent and most charismatic man they had ever met, but the truth is, the thing they were really in love with was his shoulder, which was actually just covered with an extremely attractive chromium-based Raider armor piece, which he taped together from some shit he found in the Museum of Natural History of Boston, which is probably a place I don't really know for sure. And he tried to take his double missile launching team over to fight some Brotherhood of Steel cats who showed up, because they felt that it was their necessary goal to defend their turf no matter the cost. But the Brotherhood brought missile launchers of their own, and it turned into a horrible nuclear firefight with explosions going one way and the other in all directions until finally Danny O'Green suffered a final end at the hands of Nikola Tesla with his giant lightning gun. And Nikola took that nice little chromium polished rated chest armor something or other that went on his arm, and he just put it in his inventory, and later on he threw it the fuck away because it was a piece of shit. And that is the story of the sharp Raider left arm piece. At this thing. This legendary servo-mech tank bot was designed specifically by the mechanist to do exactly what it was supposed to do, which was to defeat human beings and take their blood and then wash itself in their blood in order to keep the metal wet as a part of an occult ritual which it was programmed in long ago by robotic witch people who were making robots long before human beings roamed this earth. But anyways, the CPU was all that was recovered from the Paleolithic era, where they were making stone robots And much later into the future, after Isabella Cruz started generating robot people to try to help human beings, she found an occult ritual CPU drive which she loaded into a robot and let loose on the Commonwealth. And that robot was personally equipped to help people, but it couldn't do the job because it was already programmed to kill people. And so it went around murdering everybody, and part of its programming allowed it to create a kind of anti-biological mesh which it built into its system core. But it ended up being exactly the same size as one of them little leg pieces that you see people wearing around from time to time. And after it eventually was destroyed by God for being a horrible abomination and left out in the desert for nobody to find, Nikola Tesla came along and found that shit. And he threw it right in the fucking trash because it was totally garbage. And that is the story of the assassin's metal left leg. Let me tell you a little story about what you call it, another raider guy who, well, I mean, he wasn't really a raider. Let me tell you, he was more of a low down bastard thief, okay? And he would well, what he would do is he would go into the marketplace and he would steal those rotten apples and he would run to save his life. But the problem was that he had a small club foot that always fucking hindered him, and so he would run in a little tiny circle and everybody would make fun of him. And he would get laughed at, and he would eat his apples through his tears. And so one day what he did was he created a kind of a airfoil from an old car bumper. He strapped it to a leg, and then when he would run, he kind of gave himself a little bit of balance and balanced himself out. So basically what I'm trying to say is, even though this thing just looks like a curved piece of shit with leather straps on it, it actually is quite the movement increaser. The only problem is when you wear it on one side, not the other, it makes you go in a tiny circle. So anyways, yeah, that's what that legendary leg right there does. It's I mean, you know, it's not a very intense story, but I promise you, everybody in our village knows that legend. So just shut up and trust me, okay? Anyway, that's the story of the legendary raider leg. That's it. That's all I got. My brain is gone. It's all the way gone. So, leg wear that improves efficiency. There's a beautiful, calf sheath that we got downstairs. We pulled it off the body of a synthetic man person that came from that underground institute place where people have been experimenting with optimizing energy for years. And what they did was, you see, he had a bit of electrical discharge as part of his, it was a very latent electrical discharge as part of his sort of cyber physiology. And well, in order to make sure that they would not wasting even a single I omega watt of voltage of electricity or whatever, they ended up making a leg piece that kind of calculated and grounded out some of that energy and recycled it back into the infrastructure of his body or whatever. And basically, I mean, I don't know. I'm no scientist or electromagnetic doctor, but he had a little bit more electricity for his processing power, and so by wearing this leg today is mostly useless for all people in the entire world, but for you specifically and for that one kind of synthetic man, it will increase your ability to do calculations with your old Pip-Boy there. Just that thing you got strapped to your wrist it's kind of magic. I know that we don't discuss it, but if you wanna improve the amount of shots that you could take with VATS, you could strap that leg sheath on and go to it, my son. Anyways, that's the story of the legendary VATS enhanced metal left leg. That we found us ancient record of a special type of weapon that would fire concentrated radiation directly at the knees of somebody who might have been chasing them or who knows what all. I don't know why you would want such a thing, but indeed there was one that was built out of chicken wire and an old CD player, which we then converted to a gamma radiation weapon. but for some reason it did extra damage to somebody's legs. And we looked into it further, and the ancient records told of a armadillo god that used to creep up on his unassuming victims, and he would barrel them right in the kneecaps like a bowling ball as part of the fat kid in Hook type scenario. You know, I don't know if you saw that movie, but that's the kind of thing that he would do. Anyways, I guess he blessed this golden chalice with his kneecapping powers, and the boys who made this gun didn't even realize it, but they used that chalice to create the dish of this gamma gun here, and that is the story of the kneecapping gamma gun. I guess. Sure. That +5 poison resistance, it doesn't seem like much, but it helps a lot. And also there was that gun there that was found in the very bottom of what appeared to be some kind of ancient well or some kind of old brewery, or I don't know why there would be brick buildings down here, but it began to be apparent that they had built some kind of sewer system underneath that part of Boston. It seemed a little close to the water line for such a thing, but indeed they had done so, and in the bottom of that very dark, very moldy old brick well, somebody had accidentally crafted a weapon of an immense power that could only be explained in one way. It would drain the life from its victims based on its level of vitality. Of course, every gun does a little bit of life draining every now and again, if you know what I mean, but this one in particular could do extra harm to a person who was in perfect health. We don't really know why. I believe it may have to do with the cave-like structure of the area. Perhaps it was home once to a race of ancient Nosferatu who lived there after the destruction of the Roanoke colony, which, as you may know, was near enough to this place to make a kind of sort of sense. Well, anyways, that's what the old folks say about the legendary instigating 10mm automatic pistol. Oh man, that was it's not well known because the item in question does not seem to be very complicated, but it actually did benefit a lot of people in a lot of ways. Specifically, it was passed down from the leader of one raider gang to another after they died as a form of respect to the raider that used to own it, and also to the one who is now in charge. Now what it was, very simply, was a spring-loaded arm mount, which didn't do a whole lot, but it did cause people to be able to swing their bat just ever so slightly faster or harder, depending on what you had in mind. It was only for one arm, just in case the man in question preferred a switchblade or whatnot, and I guess you could say that it benefited many raiders in time, but as they got older, the spring would slowly tear apart the tendons in their arm, and they would not be the rookie of the year that they used to be. Oh, looks like you're gonna get 2 today. Eventually, of course, they would die violently at the hands of another raider who would take the armband up and move on with their lives. So that right there is what those fortifying radio arms is all about. But let me tell you another story right away, immediately, with no thought process about what's going to happen whatsoever. You see, there's also, in a very different place... Oh, I'm not going to kill this guy. He's a good guy. He's not trying to kill me. I'm not going to hurt him. I'm not going to hurt you, buddy. You're a good boy. You're a good boy. In a very similar place to the place where that radar arm sort of circulated around about, there was once a man who had a chest piece that was made entirely out of Bic lighters, which he then taped underneath a giant plate that went on the front of a stove, which he would wear into battle. And what would happen is, in a very strange fit of trying to be strategic, he would wear that armor, and when somebody hit him and he happened to block it, the motion of the block would cause a small spout of flame to shoot out of his chest. Don't know why he didn't just run that flame all the time when he was in combat, but Indeed, he would use it to set his opponents afire, and they would fall around and scream and lament and claw at their eyes, but only if he was lucky enough to block them. Which means that there had to be A, a melee person, and B, somebody who was, successfully blockhead, which means that they probably wouldn't have had trouble with the combat anyways. And that explains how one day a Mylurk hunter came along and he poisoned that boy. His name was Jackson O'Daniel, by the way. He died of Mylurk poison in the most horrific way possible, and all that was left of his entire body was a horrible melted piece of incendiary metal chest piece, which was lost to this day. Till Nikola Tesla came along and he murdered the shit out of everybody involved. And that's how that metal chest piece moved on. And that is the story of the legendary incendiary metal chest piece. You may not know this, but about 20 miles west of here is a very strange place. You see, back before the world was completely engulfed in utter atomic annihilation, there used to be a place where people would take their children to spend up all the money for no goddamn reason and go on things that were real fast. They would ride around on them, but it wouldn't go nowhere. It was just kind of a thing. It was a thrill, like when you get clean fingernails these days. It was a thrill, and they would go out there and they'd pay up the ass to get that thrill, those big old bricks and wads of paper that we got floating around. They would use a bunch of those to get in there and do that shit. And nowadays, it's actually the home of some of the most foul-hearted pieces of garbage who ever lived on the face of this here earth after its destruction. They're called the Disciples, and what they like to do is wear face masks with no mouth holes and no nose holes and no ear holes and even no eye holes, and they would try to fight. And my God, is the most incredible fucking thing you've ever seen, because they're some of the craziest bastards who ever lived. Just swinging and screaming and yelling and fighting with their friends and enemies over and over again. You couldn't believe the way that they swing their swords, but they were a kind of cross between, I don't know what, they look like scullery maids who fell down the stairs with an armful of pots and came up wearing them all over their body. But these days, they mostly keep to themselves and fight amongst themselves. And the truth be told, one of them has
loud ass ladies in here, man. I'm sorry, you're
I'm in the middle of a grandpa story here. Right, Hold on a second.
I'm sorry. Go on.
Oh, well.
Talking about your shitty cat.
Anyways. One of them disciples, his name was Bloodfist. He would wrap his arms up. Oh, goddamn it, it's a behemoth. Well, don't turn away from him. Teach him a horrible lesson about humanity. I think I'll just shoot him in the guts. And I hope that while I'm reloading, he hits me so that it doesn't do any damage.
I didn't mean to interrupt story time. I'm so sorry.
Oh, fuck!
We've been interrupting for like...
Well, there's two can play at that game. We can both Hulk out. I got hit right in the fucking spine with that shit.
Hey, story time.
Well, anyways, Bloodfist, he used to wrap himself up in a cloth that he would soak literally in psycho, which would cause him to have a little bit more energy whenever anybody would smash into him. He would soak that drug right in through his skin, and it would give him an extra boost in his ability to hit people in a quick succession. And that old boy, he came out to the Commonwealth, abandoning his friends who were not paying attention to him as much as he wanted. But what did I even get this thing off of? A big old monster of some kind killed him and chewed him up, and that disciple's wrapped arm just gathered up in his intestinal tract like a tapeworm until finally Nikola Tesla came along and evaporated the boy and found that cloth still wrapped up, soaked in psycho. And that is the story of the legendary powered disciple's wrapped left arm. Boys and girls, I'm glad you all came to my house today, because I have a special artifact that I found downstairs underneath a box of old puzzles that I used to build when I was bored at night. Lately, I've come to enjoy these talks that we have so much that I decided to go back through all that bullshit and see if I could find me some more items with legendary stories about them. The legend of this particular artifact is that once upon a time, or right around the time that you boys were walking over here, there was a big scary old man with a huge body that wore a giant metal chest plate, and he also had one of those massive automatic laser cannons that the Brotherhood of Steel carry around and whatnot. I don't know where he got all that shit, but the truth is, with all that power and all that strength and all that endurance, he decided that he was going to just end up being the king of the fucking roaches. Now, I know what you're thinking. Who would want to be king of the roaches? With that kind of gear, you could be king of the fucking death claws. Well, I mean, pardon my language, but the truth is that he was very easily intimidated by large creatures, and he was always a friend of the roaches. He would feed people to them, and he would pet them, and they would click, click, click in his ears, and it would put him to sleep, because he used to sleep in a clock factory, and it helped him to relax. So, anyways, one day he was walking around with his roaches, and they were digging into the ground and burrowing around and sniffing on some shit, and he ended up coming across this ancient legendary sword from long past, from ancient China, which is so sharp and so thin and so flexible and fast that it actually moved through the air with no effort at all. You could just hold on to it and it goes right through. And this allowed him to strike quickly with this sword, though he never did because he had, like I said, that giant motherfucking laser cannon, pardon my language. Well, anyways, he just kept it as a sidearm just in case he ran out of bullets with that shit. And it turned out that one day a big old boy named Nikola Tesla came along and cut his motherfucking head off with an electric blast. Turned him into a pile of ashes and killed his entire roach army. And then he took that sword all the way home and he never did nothing with it again. And that is the legendary story of this particular here sword dad, you know what I mean? You boys and girls have been hearing about swords and things, but how about we mix it up and make it more interesting and talk about little tiny pieces of armor that go on arms and legs and things? You think that they can't have legends about them? You're dead ass wrong. The truth is that there was once a man whose name was Turner Turner. That was his first and last name, and indeed he was quite the man. He carried around a big old fish hook that he wore on his ankle. It didn't look like much, but the truth is he would do a little heel kick every once in a while, and he would pull the weapon out of an enemy's hand. Of course, he had to be close enough to get to him to do it, so it was basically useless, and it only worked on the few human people who decided to not use a gun in a place like this horrible fucking Commonwealth. Well, anyways, Turner died a horrible death somewhere, and the weapon ended up getting picked up by God knows what, and the truth is that Nikola Tesla came along, killed that boy, and took that weapon right from him. And that's what happened with that dude's leg. But there was another man who had a metal arm instead, and indeed it was not just armor, it was his whole arm that was metal, and it was powered by a bunch of hydraulic door opening systems that he would use to strike people right in the face. But it ran not on electricity or electromagnetism or radiation, but literally his own blood, which would run down into the coils of the engine and powered with a kind of unholy alliance of sorcery and science. And indeed, when he was almost dead, he was the strongest, so he would allow people to shoot him in the face, neck, and head, and then he would punch them as hard as he could, and usually that would solve the problem. But that boy also died because he overdid it one day and allowed himself to be shot in the face with a harpoon cannon, and it pulled his head clean off his body, and the arm flailed wildly with all the strength that it had before it collapsed, lifeless on the ground. A super mutant one day came along and ate that person, but could not for the life of him eat the hand, so he stuck it in his back pocket until Nikola Tesla came along and killed him and his whole family. And that is the story of the bolstering metal right arm. Time was a rust devil who had come all the way from a place long away from here called Far Harbor, which, if you ever been up there, you'd know that it is a horrible place filled with nightmare creatures. No robot to speak of, to be honest, just horrible monsters all the way around the world, and they used to have to carry around these giant-ass hooks on sticks that they would use to fish, but they would grip those monsters by the back of the head and slam them to the ground like so. And one day somebody came along and figured out that if they put a specific type of genetic disease on the end of the hook, it would do a slightly more damage to all things that were biological but were not mutated and also were not human. It was an incredible foot forward for the progress of the genetic modification of viruses, and yet somehow he only used it to kill animals in Far Harbor. And he came back to the Commonwealth in order to bring all the Rust Devils down there to repopulate Far Harbor with our robots, but Nikola Tesla came along one day and he electrocuted him and all of his friends, took his pole hook with him so that he could drop it off somewhere later. That's all he done with it. That's all he done. And there's the story of the legendary Hunter pole hook. And a co-op out there on the east side of the Commonwealth there, they actually are in possession of a horrible, painful weapon which they never use under no circumstances because they believe in non-violence. They were trying to replicate the experiments done in that horrible Vault 111 where everybody died so good and shit. And one day, one of those hippies out there was dicking around with some of the computer parts left over from Professor Goodfield's overhaul and ended up wiring together a bunch of Freon into a gun that they made on accident. It was actually supposed to be a reverse microwave, but it didn't go down very well, and they ended up with a weapon of unimaginable death and danger. Well, they couldn't have that, so they buried it in the outside of their village or whatever, and they agreed never to speak of it, never know how. But one day, they all died because they couldn't support themselves because they was eating wild potatoes, and so the radiation took them over and turned them all into horrible ghouls. And the only thing that was left out there was that big old Professor Goodfield just spreading the love, and some roaches that had been creeping around in there waiting for some scraps to fall off some table somewhere. But of course that never happened because they starved to death trying to eat wild potatoes all day, every day. And as radioactive dysentery slowly turned them into ghouls, one of them roaches ended up digging up that gun and sticking it under his wing because it felt nice and cool under there now. And then Nikola Tesla came along one day and killed everybody inside of that place. And he found that pistol and he did nothing with it. Nothing at all. And that is the legend of the freezing cryo pipe pistol. Know about the experiments that Vault-Tec done with them portal guns? It turned out that indeed Fallout 4 and the Portal universe are the same, and that Vault-Tec had taken advantage of the experimentation that Aperture Science had done on them portal guns. And one of the things that they figured out was that if you paint something with moon dust paint, it actually creates a sort of surface that you can create a portal on. But the reason for that is it kind of deviates the atomic structure of things in time and space, which is why it's able to work. So before I can't remember the dude's name, Rock something. Before Rock died, the CEO of Aperture Science, he ended up taking his childhood baseball bat and coating it in moon rock paint so that he could use it just as sort of a goof at the company softball games. But the truth is that the baseball bat was actually affected by the moon dust, and as he would swing it through space and time, it would take almost no effort at all. It was as if it was trying to meet its superposition before he swung the stick there. So, anyways, he died and his secretary died, and somewhere in this world they're still experimenting on poor folk, but the baseball bat lived on because he threw it over the fence after a home run one day and lost it for all time and space. But it reappeared somewhere around here, and turned out that there was an old man who found it and used it for many years until he ended up falling in love with one of the ghouls at the Cambridge crater, and that person eventually turned into a ghoul himself and forgot how to use a baseball bat, but carried it with him always as part of a reflection on who he used to be as a person. And now Nikola Tesla got it because he killed that motherfucker just like I always said he did. And that's the story of the Vats and Hands baseball bat. There's your story. The thing that was found among the fish that day was a small piece of steel that had been slowly and surely and gnawed and bit, punctured by the Mirelurks until their small teeth could no longer make contact with the tip of the metal. And while that was no kind of real serious business, it turned out that the way that they had perforated this particular piece of steel, it made it so that no animal that had poison in his system in the entire Commonwealth could quite properly get their teeth all the way into it. And therefore the poison would just eject out onto their pants like a boy in church. And they would be very, very upset with themselves, and they would slink away, knowing that they had been outfoxed by a big old chunk of perforated steel. We call that piece of steel now the poisoner's metal left leg because it turned out to fit a left leg of a man better than an arm or a right part of his body. But you know, it really is just a miracle of modern science and biology that this thing was even created in the first place. But maybe if you boys are good, I'll let you wear it someday and you can go out snake hunting. And that is the story of this poisoner's left leg here. They're not as sensible as most folk, if you want to call it that. But the truth is that they're quite clever in their own way, and they must have a real god that actually works because they stand out there in the radiation all day and night, and they don't get sick. But some of them don't get sick. And they say it's a test of faith, but it might be some kind of mutation or some other kind of bullshit. But they used to have a doctor in their ranks, yes sir, a real doctor who had actually given up on doctoring to become a religious fanatic. And I don't know if that sits very well with me, but the truth is that doctor decided to start crafting and creating some weapons. He taught those radiation freaks about the real power of radiation. And he decided he was going to make a gun that had radioactive powers, but also was especially effective to the lost ones, as they called them. But actually, we just call them ghouls, because that's what there was. His only problem was that he accidentally decided that he was going to put a radiation gun, that is to say, this here radium rifle, and equip it with the power of extra ghoul damage by you know, just some doctoring and blessings and whatever else it was going to need. But I don't really know how he got that shit done, but the truth is that this gun both does extra damage and heals double to the ghouls around it. So it's basically fucking pointless. If I see you kids playing with this thing, I'm gonna know you're a stone cold moron, because if you're gonna sneak into my room and play with my shit, you better play with something that actually works, not this goddamn cantankerous piece of garbage. They here came from an old hunter who used to live around the mountains in this area, the Ozark Mountains. There was a boy out there whose name was Beardy Beardenstein, and it was an unlikely name, but I think it was a moniker he took on himself. But anyways, the poor boy, he was haunted by the ghosts of all the animals that he ever killed. And in order to rid himself of the damage that had been done through his bloody swath through wall of time and space, which we use a lot in these stories, but it's just a dramatic phrase, he ended up going to the old shaman who was out there in the forest, and he would ask him if there was a way that he could purge himself of the animal spirits that were floating around him all the time. And the shaman said, "Yes, indeed, I can do such a thing for you." Although he said it in a more spooky way, I'm sure. But that old shaman, he put together a spell, a magic spell, which he enchanted with onto an eye shield, if you know what that is. And the thing was mounted on the inside of a leather platelet, which was supposed to be worn directly over the hunter's face while he slept. But the hunter soon learned that if he wore it on his legs, then the animals wouldn't bite him as much, and the truth is that he preferred to catch more and kill more animals than to sleep well at night, so he turned it into a leg guard, and that's the story. of the legend of the hunter's leather left leg. I don't know if you children want to go to school when you grow up, but I would knock that fucking idea right out of your head, because all the universities in this area have been completely demolished by the same thing that ruined all the rest of the world. That old nuclear fire I keep telling you about. But down in one university, such as it is, there's a bunch of rooms that were filled once upon a time with settlers of all kinds who came together in harmony in order to farm razor grain and be friends with one another. But things went out of hand one day and they all died, and Mirelurks now inhabit that place, and I've heard that even the Institute is interested in recovering their dangerous technologies. One such technology that I speak of was a small handgun that doesn't look like much, but the truth is that it's been reworked for hundreds of years in the same forge that was filled with the blood of the family of the people who lived at University Point before they all died. And each day, each one of them would go down there and cut a little bit out of themselves and drip blood into the fire, and it would slowly poison the metal. The weapon itself, in fact, would cause people to lose their minds and murder one another so long as you hit them in just the right spot. And while this horrible sorcery has been lost for all time, for the family has been completely wiped out, there is still evidence of the weapon in question, who was once upon a time held by a synth who had recovered it from the wreckage of the old University Point, but Nikola Tesla came along and he turned that synth into a sawdust with a single fucking blow, and he took that gun and he went out there and he dropped it in the ocean, for he knew it was poison and tainted. And down it goes into the drink. And that is the legendary story of the enraging 10mm automatic pistol. Just so I can tell the story of the legendary penetrating combat knife that once belonged to a Private Dickens who went to Britain one day to fight the Nazis, and while he was out there, his best friend and actually secret lover was murdered in a Nazi concentration camp where he was tortured, and the screams of his torture had carried across the seas to where his wife and children had lived, and they heard it and they wanted to know what kind of revenge would be taken. But although they were not involved in any way in the story, I thought it was an interesting tidbit. The truth is that Private Dickens himself had penetrated into the Nazi encampment dressed as one of their own and snuck in with a knife that he had sharpened for 40 days and 40 nights on the whetstone of his own friend's dead skull, which increased its penetration power, and it went right through every Nazi who thought he was safe. Well, he came back to Boston, where he retired a farmer, and he died along with his whole family in a nuclear explosion that killed everybody and everything everywhere. And now, all that's left is his old knife that was once held by a horrible Mirelurk, where he stabbed it in his head and left it for dead. But that Mirelurk recovered thanks to radioactivity, and he was killed by Nikola Tesla, who then took that knife and carried it around for a little while before dropping it by some trees. Just like that. Oh, RT Brigadier. You're an excellent robot. Very dangerous. But did I ever tell you about the punishing leather left arm that we got laying around out here somewhere that belonged to a gunner until he was killed by Nikola Tesla? It was taken off of his body. But before he died, he got it from a safe that was inside of a church that was hidden in the deep heart of Quincy, that had all manner of good things. This particular piece of leather armor, though, he didn't realize had been once upon a time blessed by a saint, not for its capacity to heal the sick or its holy properties, but because it is put together from strands of leather cattail that people used to stay in the basement of this church and whip themselves into a frenzy for all their horrible crimes. And that punishment infused itself directly into the leather, which has been crafted lovingly into this object. Although I will say that while it does have a power that is beyond our human knowing, it truly is not that interesting. So therefore we will leave it where we found it in the church, but it did come from a magical place. And the punishment from all those people is still ensconced in the leather today. Civil War, there was a general whose name has been lost to time, and he used to go into battle in a full plate mail armor that was a very heavy and expensive type of thing. We didn't even really wear armor in those days, but for some reason he decided that he was going to, and as he went through life carrying this chest piece, it became filled with the spirit of his cavalier life. He was a pistolier and a cavalier, and he carried a sword and he carried a shield, and he eventually got shot by a single bullet right to the face. One of them conical balls that would travel over half a mile from a rifle with a bore the size of a pistol.
Oh, hi.
And well, one
is gonna get love today or kill me trying. Sorry.
Basically, that chest piece was still survived. It's the moral of that story. Well, you know, it's often spoken of in our community about how the nuclear warfare was discovered in 1960 or so by thereabouts, and was slowly experimented on and eventually brought about the destruction of all of humankind. But the truth is that there have been people who have sussed out the general knowledge of nuclear warfare as far back as 1806. Where a businessman named Cuddy O'Malley used to carry around a giant pistol, bigger than a normal pistol, so big in fact he had to have a special holster to carry it for it, and he would carry this thing around, and when he fired it, it would damn near blow his own arm off because of the kickback on it. People often wondered what exactly it was that he would do with that damn thing, and how he got so much firepower out of it without blowing his whole goddamn hand off. And what he didn't tell nobody was that he had been working together with a scientist whose name was Dr. Skidswell, and he actually had come up with a method for lacing the bullets with uranium, which he used to light them motherfuckers up. And the truth is, he'd been making tiny nuclear warheads that had fired off out of the pistol of his gun. So small, in fact, that it did a very minimal amount of extra damage, but more damage than good old Samuel Colt could have ever perceived. And he used to blow holes in the sides of buildings for sport, and people would laugh and clap, and then they would stand around the rubble of their old town and wonder what the hell they did that for. Well, he eventually did die after forming an oil bearing ship out there in the East Coast, and his sons ran the company for years and years, and he eventually ended up becoming quite the powerhouse of a corporation, until one day, of course, all went to shit, and the only people who were left alive were the few surviving family members who eventually ended up burrowing into a secret compartment which was set up in his headquarters that he had running out there in Boston. Well, as time went on, they eventually, passing down the gun from one child to the next, they ended up being horrible raiders who were led by, indeed, Cuddy the 17th. And as he died at the hands of Nikola Tesla, his poor gun fell into the hands of his compatriot, who eventually ended up dying as well. And that's the story of the mighty Western revolver. Pool cue is? It was a game that we had back before the war, and I know I shouldn't know anything about it, but I've been around and learned and studied this old culture we used to have here. But here's a story about a pool cue. It's a kind of stick that you would play this game with, and it had a little bit of a hard core inside of it, maybe metal. Sometimes they would play with solid wood, but the truth is, it's not a very effective melee weapon. Well, one day there was a bomb that went off around the south end of Boston, and one of these pool cues happened to not get destroyed and instead sat in the glowing sea for 200 years. And that is the story of the irradiated pool cue.
And so
Oh, you, Mr. Glowing Deathlight, you have chosen poorly. Jesus fucking Christ! I couldn't have gotten luckier with this to be my glowing sea companion, because I probably would have ran out of bullets.
Immediate repairs to primary system.
as you're used to, but the Institute had played around with biology for so long that they figured out a way to convert life force into focus and then pump it back into your system like a kind of biofeedback matrix. And one of their guns was to help entirely with accuracy. Sorry, I'm just too interested in what's going to happen here. I think Have No Ammo is literally having a tournament to see who gets to fight him next. It really is broken. I'm not gonna hang out with him forever. I didn't know that this was gonna happen though. You have to believe me. That is so absurd. Okay. Yeah, resume a normal operation. Well, anyways, the Institute had generated a laser gun that was so weak that in order to power it, they could literally fucking just power it from your mind, and you could focus your mind into the gun. But they reversed the power of that gun and ended up making it so the gun powered your mind instead with a couple of fusion cells, and so they added a little bit of a function to kind of heighten your brain activity when you would pull the trigger. But the problem is that the gun, in order to be worth a damn, would have been a very high-powered single-beam laser rifle, and instead they decided to make it an automatic laser weapon, which allowed for some, you know, pretty impressive intro 3-shot burst type situations. But the truth is, it was enough to kill anybody in one hit if they had made any kind of effort at all. Yeah, RTDU, were you here for this? Have you? His name was Samuel Big Bottom, and he used to hang out around the club where I used to hang out all the time. But the thing was, Samuel was always frightfully sick. He would get sick all the time, and he was so sick, in fact, that he would often cause other people to be sick. But the truth is, he hardly ever died of his sickness. In fact, never. But other people often would. So it turned out that he was kind of giving off a sort of biological defense of his own. He had enough of an immune system to keep himself from going to hell in a handbasket, but it would often cause other human beings to die around him. But only human beings, of course, because that's how viruses work. Anyway, he used to carry around a little lever-action rifle with a big silencer on it, and he would suck on his bullets and put them in the thing and shoot them, and it would cause people to get sick and die almost immediately, which is crazy. And in the meantime, he had a piece of radar armor that he'd gotten when he went to visit Nuka World with his family one day. And indeed, he used to use that thing to guard his face, but it coughed inside of it so much that it became slippery and gross, and they eventually ended up using it as a leg armor, so he actually had a little bit of extra defense against human beings as well. But anyways, I know that story seems unlikely and might not make sense, and I know you all want to join the party because there's just too many people in the room for you to really pay attention to me, but the truth is, that is the story of the legendary Assassin's lever-action rifle and operator's leg piece. Yep. Well, now you might take a look at this thing and be like, Pappy, that ain't no motherfucking weapon, that's a rolling pin. I mean, Grandma can wield it, but nobody else can. But the truth is, it ain't no rolling pin at all. We found this outside of an exploded craft of some kind that was set apart from all other human invention in a way that we could not describe or understand. Now, it could have been some kind of automated, high-tech weapon of war from a long time ago that circled to Earth on a nuclear battery until it finally ran itself dry. But take a look at the markings on the side here. This ain't no rolling pin, son. This right here is an artifact from an alien spacecraft. We believe it is, in fact, a piece of the power conduit that used to ride this motherfucker around the city. Well, anyways, of course, they call it a rolling pin because that's what it looked like. But the truth is that what you could do with this thing, if you don't know, is you could swing it around somebody's head and neck, and it would actually occasionally fill them with electricity, which if you ever been electrocuted, you know exactly what that feels like. Well, anyways, the man who found this kept it in his house, and he actually thought it was so important and mystical that he used to go to bed with it. Well, one day we found Smitty completely charred to a crisp because he had accidentally rolled on top of this thing in the night, and it had froze him to the bed and filled him with electricity until he died, just like one of them old convicts. Well, I took that rolling pin for safekeeping, and that here is the one you looking at right now, and that is the legend of this charged rolling pin. The thing about this here troubleshooter's rifle, as it's known to say, is that even though all it is a normal gun, it does extra damage to robots. And I know what you're thinking, what the hell kind of difference does it matter to the bullet? But the truth is, robots are extremely susceptible to insults. I know what it said. It said insults. And they also have an incredibly fast ability to read and process things. Now, a robot insult looks a little bit like a human insult, but it actually is a kind of question that you ask them, and the question doesn't have an answer, but they can't solve it because they're a robot, and the brain just goes in circles. So what we do is, this here rifle, right before it fires a bullet, it puts a little bit of that question on the bullet, and it makes them confused, because they sit there and try to answer the question a little bit, and they get all turned around and tore up. And that right there is why this rifle does exactly that. Assholes. Well, that's about the story of this rifle. We don't really know who decided to imprint it, but it was probably somebody who didn't have a good time with robots. That's the story of the troubleshooter's hunting rifle. But let me tell you about this here synth leg. Now, this one, there's not very many people who tell this story. In fact, I might be the only person who's ever told this story, but this here synth leg came from that alternate dimension that I told you about, where they have another company or cabal or secret science organization or whatnot, where they manufacture items. And this one looked like an institute item, but it's only because they tricked it out with that polycarbonate bullshit. The truth is, this one came from that there aperture place where they had the big robots doing tests with them guns, and this one right here has just got a little wacky spring built into it, so when you fall, as long as you land on your feet, you won't take no damage. I know that doesn't sound right, but, you know, trust me on this. It just absorbs the blow as such as it is. It's got some kind of sensor, and it counteracts the fall somewhat. Of course, it'll cave your fucking knees in, because it's only a shin guard, but they didn't think too hard about it. Anyways, we call it the acrobat synth leg because it allowed people to jump off a high shit so long as they land on one foot. But nobody does, and if you don't have two of these, and we don't know where the second one is, you'll probably break your other ankle and you'll never walk again. And that is the story of the acrobat synth leg.
You went through
Pew, 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 pew. Or make. You know, this violent combat shotgun is not just called a violent automatic combat shotgun because it's in fact meant for violence. The truth is, this shotgun right here is more violent than a normal shotgun by, I would say, about a 25% or so. And the only reason that it is in such a way is because once upon a time, where I grew up, there was 2 cities beyond, there was a gang of thieves that lived there, or raiders or whatever you want to call them. But they were organized and trustworthy, and they were never fucked with because they were horrible nightmare people who would kill everybody who ever fucked with them. Until one day, somebody decided to get revenge and beat them all to death with a tire iron. But this here belonged to one of the lesser gang members who thought that he would impress his boss. It was a normal shotgun that he got from God knows where, and he cut the end off of it. I think you can see his name right there. It's printed. It says Bugs Jackson. Yeah, that was his name, and he used to carry this thing around in a pistol holster like a crazy person. It stuck up all the way to his armpit. But when he got into a scuffle, he would lift his arm as high as he could, and it looked like a bird about to take flight, and he would pull that shotgun out, pull the trigger, and it would fire those pellets God knows where. I don't know if he loaded them shells up with extra gunpowder or something, but it would really rip a hole in a motherfucker. So, poor Bugs, he, you know, along with everybody else, he was beaten to death by a 70-year-old man with a tie iron and went into the camp one night after he discovered the dead body of his daughter, who was just trying to run a shop. So that's why you never mess with old people, if you know what I mean. I am one of them, and I insist that you not do anything to upset me. Other than that, I think it's probably best to say, I forgot this, by the way, when we came in last time. Other than that, I think it's best to say that there is the legendary story of this here gun. Allow me to illuminate the story, the legend of this here sharp left leg. We call it sharp, but it's not really sharp. It was a saying that they used to have where things were sharp because they were, you know, they were quick as whip, tight as drum, smooth as an egg, or whatever, you know, just like in the mind.
Just walk away.
No reaction
Not
at all.
saying anything.
And so there once was a young man who had made a beautiful trophy that he was going to give away as a congratulatory gift for his friends, for the first person to get 100 headshots on a feral ghoul. He made this beautiful trophy. But right as they was about to come to the end of the neck-and-neck race as to who was doing the most headshots, the ghouls broke through the barricades and started eating people alive, and he had no choice but to strap this thing to his leg in order to try to defend himself from the low-hanging fruit, if you know what I mean. You know them ghouls that just kind of crawl on the ground and bite your ankles. He had one of these things on just for that reason, but it was so beautiful and gorgeous that it actually kind of increased his charisma and people's perception of his intelligence, and they would always give him high fives and praises for wearing such an object on his leg. However, he was indeed bit by an infected rat roach 2 days later, and he died of a horrible disease because he only had one piece of armor on one leg, and that's how he got bit. Well, I
just warm my face up.
I keep this trophy around just for reminders of that boy and his willingness to make the Commonwealth fun again, you know. Well, anyways, there's the legend of this here sharp metal leg piece. Metal left leg has been discussed once upon a time in a long ago before in this playthrough, but this is a completely different item that should be taken seriously because it does exactly the same thing. Now, what we've got here is, it looks like just a normal piece of armor that goes on your leg, right? You know, for soccer or fighting ghouls or whatever it is that you would be doing. But this one here actually protects you from the animals by kinda, I don't know, you might be too young for this, but it kinda protects you by seducing them a little bit. See, all the animals in this place are, for whatever reason, kinda turned on by the scent of the original foxglove flower, and somebody had the bright idea to coat armor with it, head, toe, and tail with this flower scent, and it would cause the animals to try to protect them or impress them rather than hurt them. But unfortunately, this poor soul, we don't have a name for him because, you know, he kind of was a loner, as you could tell. He went out one day to try to hunt himself up some meat, and he accidentally got fucked to death by a jaguar. I know what I said, and I meant it. He got fucked to death by a jaguar. So that's why we only wear one piece of armor at a time. There's different people in the Commonwealth that hold these different items to make sure that nobody gets a hold of all of them at once. It's just too dangerous. But it will help to try to distract or protect you from an animal. And so if you ever decide you're going to go outside and, you know, maybe have some friendly time with a jaguar but not go too far, you could wear this leather arm here or this metal leg or whatever any of these other hunters' items have on them. But anyways, that's the legendary story of this here metal leg. That's it. That's all I got.
You're not gonna finish the story?
That's what time is it? Welcome back, everybody. I'm here to tell you the legend of the instigating disciple knife. You know, the names that we give these don't really make a whole lot of sense. There's not like a story behind the name. But that's why I'm here, to tell you exactly why this item is considered legendary, and it's because there's a legend surrounding it. In this case, this knife was once upon a time a wrench that belonged to a mechanic who lived in Ireland and hung out in a cave and built swords and knives for people. I know it was silly, but it was part of the whole military system that they had back there, that the commanders would wear swords, and he would make all manner of things for them. He would even work on the tanks a little bit, hence the wrench. But one day it seemed as though the world had been utterly destroyed, but Ireland was not one of the primary targets of nuclear warfare, and so he remained in that cave. And he went deeper and deeper, because the further up he went towards the mouth of the cave, the more likely he was to die of radiation. So he went all the way to the top of that cave. And in the bottom of that cave, and he went all the way to the bottom of that cave, and he found a small shrine to some unknown and unseen deity, so old and so tired that it did not even have a name when it was risen to its full power. And he set his tools on the bench there, and he asked for protection, because he had no other choice but to beg the old and dark gods, the nameless ones, for help. And they filled his tools with the capacity to kill, to take 2 lives for every life that it took. And while he went out into the Commonwealth a peaceful man, he came back out surrounded by the protection of the Shadow People, and also wielding all manner of tools, drills, swords, and wrenches. Well, he died of old age, and he gave his due to the nameless ones, and his wrenches fell by the wayside as he wandered through the horrible wreckage of a theme park that he took his children to one year, called Nuka World. And one day, one of the disciples picked that wrench up and pounded it flat and turned it into a knife, which turned out to be much more effective for killing. And it retained the power that was given to it by the dark and nameless gods that lived in the bottom of that Irish cave. And that is the story of this here instigating disciples knife. You see this gun right here? It's pretty interesting. I'm not sure how to describe it, but it looked like it was made by some kids in the backyard. It looks like a toy made of all kind of wacky components. There's the shovel handle and other things that I'm not going to talk about right now, but you see how it sort of looks a little handmade? Well, the truth is that this gun here is actually made in 2 places simultaneously. It's a quantum gun. It's actually both a gun here and a gun in an alternate universe. But the gun in the alternate universe has been sitting on a shelf since 1962, and the old man who lives with that gun continuously reloads it because he's afraid that he didn't leave it loaded, and he's senile and can't remember if he loaded it or not. So he just keeps going back, checks the bullets, they're low, he reloads them, and there you go. But the reason the bullets keep going down is because the bullets travel through the barrel in a teeny tiny wormhole which travels to the other side of the universe. And that bullet comes out at the exact same moment as this other bullet. Now I know what you're thinking. Shouldn't that cause them to counteract with each other, maybe even fuse together or explode? Shouldn't that erase the universe as we know it? Nah, shut your damn mouth, son. You don't know shit about quantum physics. The truth is, they just both come out at the same time and they hit at the same speed. And now I can see in your face that you're thinking, well, wouldn't that do the exact same damage as one bullet, Grandpa? As I said before, shut your damn mouth. This here is a magical weapon. It's coming through another dimension. We could learn all kinds of things about the future and the past if we could just figure out how to manipulate this thing for good. But we can't, because it's too confusing, and if we observe it, it collapses into a single rifle. So we just stick it on the shelf there and talk about it from time to time, as I'm doing to you right now. Well, this old rifle came into my hands from a lonely mailman who tried to use it to fight his way through a pretty unsavory location, and he was bleeding out when he came to my door, and I didn't even realize what he had in his hand. I don't think he did. God knows where he got it, but now it come into my possession, and we've been using it ever since. And that is the legend of this here 2-shot handmade rifle. God damn it, Artsy, don't let me fall in the water. You're in charge. Fight. of the pre-war world, but what you probably don't know is the unbelievable level of bullshit that they used to be able to get people to buy for no reason at all, except for to maybe, you know, give themselves a little pat on the back for some kind of extra special object that they had, thinking it was going to make their game better or their lives better. They used to wear shirts with copper weaves because they thought it harnessed some kind of invulnerable energy. Well, I can't say I didn't see that coming. But we may as well finish the cold pool cue story. They used to wear armbands that had holograms on them because they thought it also would improve their game in some way, would give them more energy or create a magnetic balance or God knows what all bullshit that they used to do. Well, among other things, they used to have a snooker stick, or as they call it in America, a pool cue. They would load up with cold water that they would imply that if you had this thing and you moved the pool cue, that the motion of the water inside would grant you an extra little bit of hit or something. I'm not sure why you would do that. It seemed like just one more thing you wouldn't have control of on a pool cue, but of course there were dumbass people out there who would buy it up and they'd wrap it in some kind of bullshit velvet God knows what all and take it with them, and they would try to play with it at the pool house. And you know, the old boys were just the sticks that they carved themselves from branches. They would always beat them with just those sticks or lampshades or God knows what. They would always win. And so these always ended up getting thrown away, and this one right here ended up getting thrown away and shipped along with the rest of the scrap from the government up to a place called Anchorage, where they were having a fight before the world exploded. And of course the ice froze inside, but it froze so hard and so cold that it stayed frozen and cold. And every once in a while, you would hit somebody with this thing, and a tiny bit of this cold water would come spraying out, and it would give them such a shock that they would be unable to move during the fight. And that's what this thing is useful for, if it was ever useful for anything at all. And that's the legend of this here frigid pool cue. Died, son? Well, no, of course not, or else you wouldn't be here. But there are creatures in the Commonwealth that sort of die, but can be brought back to life. They're called robots. They're kind of automatic machine kind of thing, but they can see and they can kill, and we oftentimes are worried that they're going to take over, but now more than ever they have a chance, and they haven't done so yet, so I think we're maybe okay. Anyways, the reason I ask if you ever died before is because you don't really know what it is that you run on. What's your, I don't know how to put it, what's your energy made out of? That's a debate for the ages. People have been talking about where life essence comes from for as long as I can remember, and I've been alive for 75,000 years. However, before we had the discussion of souls and rumors of souls, we had a kind of theory that maybe all life came from the finger of God, some kind of electricity that would come out of the sky. And indeed, these robots, they run on electricity, so this here machine, it can be slowed down or thwarted somewhat. How am I finding these at a rate that I can't even finish the story before I have another one? And it's always garbage armor. Fuck you! I hope your family is disappointed in you. Okay, anyways. Yeah, he's 75,000 years old. He's the first ghoul. He was irradiated by a radioactive stone inside of a meteorite that crash-landed in ancient Mesopotamia back before there was even fully evolved human beings settling on the plains of the Tigris and Euphrates. Okay, but anyways. Well, these robots, they run on electricity, and sometimes the things that kind of connect them all up, they give them a chance to run and hide and fight and kill and play. If you've ever seen a robot play, I highly don't recommend it. But they run on electricity, and the electricity can be stymied somewhat by wearing this kind of strappy thing that goes around your leg here. See, They all touch the ground except for some of them, but most of them do, and a lot of them have electricity running even through the plates of armor that they got. It's not very effective, but they're running on nuclear batteries, so they don't give a shit all about, energy consumption. Yeah, that's the one. So, anyways, if you touch this thing to them, sometimes you might even be able to slow them down or stop them in their tracks somewhat, because the electricity goes through a rubber pad that's behind this leather plate here, and it'll ground the electricity right down, and they'll slow down a bit before they attack you, and that will prevent about, I don't know, let's say 15% of the damage total. So, this here is actually my own design. I made it myself because I used to have to kill robots all the time back in the original Ancient Aliens Robot Wars, which was, 4,500 years before the Common Era. We don't talk about it much, though, because everybody I knew from that era is long gone, but it never hurts to have a little bit of rubber on you in case you have to fight somebody who's wrapping electricity around you and tickling you with them electric tendrils like our good friend Nikola Tesla. But there's the legendary story of this troubleshooter's leather left leg. Here on this side, I know what it looks like. It looks very similar to the object that I just showed you with the rubber plate that it has installed. But you see this tiny tube right here? Actually, this was a kind of a, how do you describe it? A kind of primitive and ancient wire that was made out of, I actually made them out of silver threads because I didn't know no better, but you could make it out of any old metal really, as long as it conducted electricity. But this thing here, it looks like a kind of a, underneath this metal part you can see a little bit of a pan thing that I've got built in there that I used to fill up with mashed potatoes and lemon juice. And now I know what you're thinking. That's some bullshit, old man. You are making it up. No, sir, I'm not. This thing right here used to actually accumulate electricity from to the other side, and I would wear both of these leg pieces simultaneously into combat, and when one of them ancient alien robots would attack me, some of the electricity would be siphoned off, and the rest of it would be grounded out. And while we slowly accumulated energy on this side, every once in a while one of them would get too close, and I'd give him a flying knee kick right to the face like your friend Tony Jaa, and they would explode with damage, a little bit of damage anyways, depending on how hard they were coming at me. So this one right here collected the electricity, and the other side, it would kind of bounce some of it back a little bit, and it would give them a little bit of a shock. It wasn't much, but you know, we were tribal people. We were very simple. This right here is the pinnacle of technology at the time. It was so secret that nobody discovered it again for another 2,000 or 3,000 years. So I'll thank you to wipe that stupid smug off your face, and I'll thank you to thank me for saving you from an alien race of robots that was meant to destroy all humankind just so that they could have, guess what, all the gold. Because apparently it insulates electricity better than silver. Well, what the fuck did I know? I was only, 27 at the time. But anyway, they're the legendary story of this reflected... What is it called? Punishing metal painted leg. In the 50s, we had a meat industry as well, but the thing was that nowadays they got that little gun that goes, and you could just put it right to the cow's skull and go. I mean, nowadays we got Brahmins, but before, a long time ago, we used to have cows that just had one head. I know you don't remember that because you were just a tiny baby back then, but we had cows that had one head. And you could just knock the brain out. Yep, there's another legendary item. I'm not even done with this story yet. You could just knock the brain out and that would be that. But before then, you had to kill them by smashing the brains in with a sledgehammer. And there was once a guy whose name was Mickey Finnegan who was terrible with the sledgehammer. He just missed every single time. He would do a glancing blow. It was garbage. You just couldn't do it. So... old Mickey Finn, he figured out that he could load up the tip of his sledgehammer with a kind of a rad scorpion venom, but back then they were just little guys. We just called them scorpions. They weren't rad until they were gigantic. Yeah, he would kill the cows like that, so he didn't lose his job, but the problem was, of course, that they would die from the poison being in the system, and And that would almost certainly cause poison to affect the people who bought the meat. And he lost his job anyways, but it was alright because he sustained himself for just long enough to drink 2 bottles of wild turkey before he decided to climb a building, and he was thinking about maybe ending it all, but he didn't have to. Instead, he got the best view of all, watching the world explode in nuclear fire. And he died there on the edge of that building as a great big black grease stain smeared down across the top of the building as everything else was vaporized around him. And that's the story of this here poisonous sledgehammer. What, are you getting tired? Are you bored of my bullshit? Well, too bad, because I got one more thing for you. Check this out. Now, I know you little boy like playing with knives and shit. I sure did when I was a kid, but this knife right here came from well, it came from one umbrella factory. I know it's unlikely, but it was supposed to be some kind of a self-defense umbrella or something. I guess it was the handle of the umbrella, and you would pull the knife out at the bottom and stick the guy with it. But through an accidental machinery mishap, the umbrella kind of got built into the knife a little bit. I mean, you could see right here if I hit this switch, a tiny little bit of cloth and plastic would popped out. Only I've replaced it instead with high-grade aluminum foil that would give my capacity for defending myself a little bit of a boost. Or at least it did back when I used to fight, but these days I let you children do the fighting while I just tell you these stories and loan you these items. See, the mythos is growing right out from under me. Jab that knife in my face. The story of the knife with the metal inside of it. A metal umbrella that would pop out. But it would only work if you were perfectly still, otherwise I couldn't get the button to go off. So if you were standing still, you could pop this little shield out on the bottom. But otherwise, you basically were fucked. Anyway, that's the whole story. I mean, I don't know. What do you want me to say? Magic and myth, and I know you didn't believe any of that bullshit, but I mean, some of it I might have made up a little bit, but all these effects are totally true. This one here, though, is a product of total technology that we were exploiting to the very pinnacle of our lifespan before it was all too late and the world came crashing down around me as I watched my friends and family die, and I, as an immortal old man, stood on the edge of the precipice of the fire and wondered, why in God, when is it going to be my turn? But this whole thing came blowing in the door around that moment when I was bellowing hollow threats at a god that would not let me die, and I went in and examined it somewhat. And it was a very, very complicated device, fairly straightforward. You see, this whole entire armor set would do a thing where when you were in trouble, it would just inject you with Med-X. It spoke to you when you had the full set, and it was fucking annoying as hell. And if you were always fighting, you would soon find yourself addicted to opiates, which is why we didn't have the full set here, because I'm way over that fucking dragon. But anyways, this thing right here is just small enough and just, useful enough that it won't go through all your drugs. It won't talk to you trying to ask you if you like it or not. And it will protect you somewhat based on how much damage it believes you've suffered through this little kinetic modifier here. It really does work, I swear to God. You could try it if you want to, but... There we go. Also, I almost died from that. Shit, they're not all dead in there. And so anyways, I keep this around just in case. Oh God. We just had a Saving Private Ryan moment. Both of Artsy's legs are down. Handmade rifle looks very similar to the one that I was telling you about that came from 2 different dimensions simultaneously, but this one just is a slightly modified model of the normal handmade rifle, which is of course standard issue for people who make rifles by hand. They just make the same one over and over again. That's how handmade rifles work, son, don't you know? But anyways, this one right here has a bit of a gas ejection system that would launch the bullet, forward, of course. and the leftover pressure would normally come out the side to eject the shell, but this one has been modified slightly to actually give you a little bit of a boost in the look here in the stock. You see that little hole there? It kind of ejects a little bit of gas, and I know you're wondering, like, what's the fucking point of that? But here's the thing. If you were to happen to go into a fight and you were actually looking down the barrel so that it was pointing right behind you and you were moving forward, such as you would do if you were moving, you would actually have a little bit more momentum. Now you gotta keep your feet moving or else you're gonna fall down and die, but in this particular case I think it's okay to say that we call this thing a nimble handmade rifle because it makes you move a little bit faster, I guess. I don't know. You just got to be aiming down the scope or else it'll come from the side and will just blow your balance off. You understand? Anyway, that's the legendary story of this here nimble handmade rifle. For a normal level action rifle, you might be familiar with, it requires you to pump the old bullet out of the chamber in order to load the other one. It's sort of a two-stroke type of cycle, but this particular lever action rifle, it came from 1808, where furriers used to travel around in the very unsullied west to gather up furs to sell to the north, where they would try to go into Canada, but they needed to cover themselves head to toe in beaver skins, and sometimes it was slightly harder to kill a beaver because when you killed one, the rest of them would scatter and you'd have a problem. Well, this man named Maximilian Provost, he came up with this gun here. You could take a look, see it for yourself, but normally when you pump the chamber in and out, it does a little thing where it sort of just loads a bullet and ejects the other bullet. I mean, not in that order necessarily, but that's what happens. But in this case, the pumping action of this particular gun also serrates the edge of the bullet so that when it strikes its target, it immediately explodes into some flechettes, which required a lot of mathematical precision and so far has never failed, even though it's very old compared to when it was made originally. Well, anyways, the whole point of this weapon originally was to fire it into a family of beavers, and the fletchette would explode out of the daddy beaver, and it would shred the faces off of the mother and baby beavers, which would allow you to kill more beavers with one bullet. Well, Maximilian, he made himself a millionaire, and he ended up trying to patent his gun, but it was stolen by Samuel Colt, who was jealous of his technologies. And he killed Maximilian and buried the gun deep in a box in the ocean underwater, and somehow after the bomb it was shaken free, and it was moved to the surface, where it was discovered by a small boy who ended up blowing his whole family to bits, and in shame he brought me the weapon and explained what he had done. And that is the story of this here explosive advanced lever action rifle. Many pieces of armor, as you may know, are designed to protect you, but this one is a very unique piece of armor. It's sort of a strange concept that somebody came up with a long time ago, and I can't really vouch for its effectiveness, but here's the thing. This armor actually has a small amount of pressure that's required for it to set off like a bear trap and snap your ass in half. And the truth is, the reason that somebody would wear such a horribly unsafe device such as this is that they expected it would be possible to manipulate the system into letting you fill yourself with adrenaline when you were getting close. You could actually hear a small timer that would beep faster when it was about ready to go. So, and I'm not sure who made this thing, but I'll tell you how it was found. There was a sailor who was going out to see if he could deal with them folk down in Far Harbor. While he was out there in the middle of the ocean, out there in a tiny dinghy, there was a young man who had been split clean in half, and this piece of armor sat right in the middle. I don't know what he was getting into a fight out there in the middle of nowhere, but he might have been fighting some kind of giant serpent or a Milo queen or something, and he ended up taking too much damage and it snapped him in half, but presumably it kept him alive for long enough to do some proper damage, and maybe he got a little adrenaline out of it as well. I don't know, maybe he died screaming like a Viking, but he got split in half, and his intestines was the only thing holding him together. It was a horrible sight. I saw it myself. I actually recorded it when he showed up on shore by dragging the dinghy along, hoping that it wasn't nobody's son. The good news is it wasn't. But we took that piece of armor, experimented with it a little bit. We ended up strapping it to a dummy and firing our guns at it. And after a little while, we thought, well, this here is just a normal piece of metal chest plate. And we don't know what the difference is between this and some other bullshit. And I don't know why we experiment with it anyhow. But who knows what kind of crazy shit could come out of the ocean that way. And it turned out to be a nightmare of a machine because it cut that mannequin clean off at the hips. We've discovered that it has a sort of adrenal property, and if you would like to wear it, I suggest that you, take care of yourself. You can get to a certain level of damage without getting killed, can't you? Yeah, sure you can. You have so far every time I hit you with this stick. Well, anyways, there's the legend of this martyr's metal chest piece is known. The shoulder piece that we got, it seems to have some kind of a weird pattern on it, and you might think that this is something to do with some kind of ancient Celtic religion, but no. This is actually science at work, science I tell you. See, here's what's going on. This machine is underneath the plate here. As I lift it up, you can see it's sort of a clockwork job, but it's got circuits and shit in there, nothing too serious, but what it does, in a way that you would not expect, is that it slowly unfolds itself somewhat as a result of the motion and kinetic energy that it feels inside of it. It's like a clock that gets wound as you walk around swinging your wrist. Only in this case, it gets wound up from you running, or maybe even getting smacked by somebody holding a giant club, with you blocking it up with your giant club. It eventually will get wound up to a point that it expands itself and gives you just a tiny bit more coverage. Now it's a little bit hard to walk around in, so it automatically resets back to the default position. But this here machine was devised by Enrico Fermi, if you know who that is. He was a scientist, but also a bit of a tinkerer, it would seem, and his signature's right there, printed at the bottom, along with a serial number for some part we don't yet understand or can possibly manufacture. Yeah, that's the word. Sorry, it's been so long since we manufactured shit. But anyways, that's basically the story of this here legendary metal arm piece. It seems that we have seen Nikola Tesla's final ride, or so we thought. But on the way back home, he happened to cross this little number right here. It's just a normal baseball bat, am I right? So you think. The truth is that the wood came from, it came from Yggdrasil, the tree of life. Well, so it said. Really, I mean, if you take a look at it, you can see that he's got these, Nordic runes carved into the bat, but take a look here at the bottom, you see, it's not really from Yggdrasil. It's got a marketing stamp on it for the Louisville Slugger Company, which used to exist right around these parts. If you look closely, you can see that right next to that little logo there, they've drilled a hole. And what do you suppose that they poured into that hole, young gentlemen? Why, it was nothing more than a bunch of lead that they poured right down the center of this baseball bat. And they somehow drilled a couple of holes here on the side to make it so that when the bat rebounded from the swing, after cracking in, that this metal would slowly move forward a little bit. I suppose they must have created a small gap or something, but essentially what happens with this thing is that it actually kind of cracks the armor a little bit, bends it in, causes damage through their own armor, which is pretty crazy. Of course, the man who built it was insane. He had a gigantic beard, and he believed very sincerely that he had carved the bat directly from the tree trunk of, the Viking legend. But nevertheless, this is how it goes. Sometimes the legends are true, and sometimes they're false, but they're mostly true. And that is the story of this here legendary baseball bat. Then out of the old satchel and threw it on the ground there. It's because it's dangerous to keep in a bag like that, and I don't know if it's worth even carrying home, but the truth is that item is an item of some rapport, if you know what I mean. There is some secret tales told about it, and they make me right uncomfortable, but the main reason is because It's got some kind of ability to repel weapons, and the bag's full of weapons, of course, as well as other pieces of armor. And I'm afraid it's going to deflect one of them right through the side of the bag. We're gonna have to carry all this shit home in our arms. Well, I don't want that to happen, so I put it on the wayside for the next, lucky traveler to maybe find it. I would wear it home, but of course I'm wearing all this skeletal power armor to keep my body back together because it's held up only with this suit and nothing else. Well, I may as well tell you this story since you're probably the last person who's going to hear it from the right mouth. The truth is that object right there came from a meteorite. It's some kind of space rock that comes out of the sky. And that particular item itself was carved from the heart of a meteorite from a thing we used to call a lodestone. It's a very odd object, but the truth is that when you connect it to a tiny battery, it's got so much electrical force that it repels metal objects, including things like swords and bullets and all who God knows what all. Well, I'm not sure about the superstition of it all. I don't think that it's actually dangerous or haunted in any way. I was just afraid it was gonna turn the backpack inside out if I kept it in there. I could feel it pushing and pulling shit around. It's quite the dangerous game to play with ferrous materials such as this. So we left it alone, and we'll never see it again, I hope, because somebody will maybe wear it and make a legend new for it all by themselves. Until that day comes, I hope that you keep an eye out for such things. But that is the story of that reflecting legendary punishing.
You're good enough.
Metal
You're
left
smart
arm.
enough. Doggone it, people like you.
Yeah. Look at the way that this leather shimmers in the sunlight. You can't, can you? Your eyes just can't focus on it. Well, the truth is that there are some creatures in this world who have a kind of stealth boy tendency all their own. Such things as a chameleon death claws, and there's some Milo kings, and so on and so forth, that are able to soar and more or less defend themselves just by being invisible. Well, this here piece of armor was made from one of them, a special one that we used to call El Chupa Libre. I don't know what it stands for, but apparently it was some kind of legend. Or maybe I'm saying it wrong, I don't really know, but it was just a joke that we had. We didn't think he was real, but it turned out that that's exactly what he was, and he would creep through the camp and devour Brahmin and children, and occasionally both at the same time. Eventually somebody went out there and decided to throw a bunch of landmines around and put one Brahmin in the inner pan so he wouldn't trigger them, and when we came to the next morning after what sounded like Thor and all the angels of hell came descending down upon us, there was just bits and pieces of this horrible chameleonic deathclaw everywhere. The only thing that was left of him was a little scrap of his right arm, which we ended up carving the shoulder out and making a little piece of leather out of it, so that we could make a little armor with the strength of a deathclaw. It didn't really help much because the problem is that this thing kinda makes your eyes hurt just from looking at it, don't it? And the problem with that is, oh fuck. Ay, Dios mío. So we mostly don't use this thing. It's not as useful as it looks. It just makes you hard to see your own shit. Get out of here. The raiders act like uncivilized swine who just have no idea what the fuck they're doing except for possibly unbelievable urge to kill and to drink blood and to decorate the house with entrails and shit. Although I've heard that kind of decor doesn't last very long and you have to just keep going out and finding more because it dries up and blows away. But there actually are a few raiders that are intelligent to some degree, if you want to call them that. One of them was, well, we just called him Dirty John. That was what we called him. He didn't really have a last name or any kind of friends or anything. We called him that because he had configured his armor, such as it was, with some small mirrors underneath. You gotta be fucking kidding me. To make it look like he was just walking around with some glints that would reflect the sunlight or the light of the room, and it would be a little bit harder to hit him. And he would move out of the way of the bullet because he would see them get distracted ever so slightly, or so it's told. But the reason why he put the mirrors on there is so that he could look up people's dresses. I hope you don't ever think to do that, and I hope that that idea is wiped right out of your head the moment I said it. But anyways, Dirty John died because he looked up the wrong dress one day, and some woman who was carrying around a sawed-off shotgun decided to take his head clean the fuck off. But that's the story of this here Dirty John armor. Holy shit, we're doing this. Be recited in free form, beatnik poetry form. I can do that. This here machete came from a land defeated by time. But once upon a time, it was a land that time did not defeat, such as it was. And indeed, this entire machete came from a place where there was once men who would do drugs in order to improve their ability in battle. But they did not have time. They did not have time. They did not have time to take the drugs during the fight. So they put a small needle in the handle, which they would squeeze with their thumb in order to get high during the fight. I don't know where the fuck I'm going with this. The needle contained cow shit and a little plastic. And while you might think that that's bullshit, it invented a kind of primitive jet. And the jet would cause them to have a little bit more strength. More than you would expect from Jet in combat. Machete, the man with the hat. We defeated him. He died. And the machete, it lied on the ground until a man picked it up and brought it to our village. There's the beat poetry story. This is the legend of the relentless machete. You might not be familiar with the movies and tales of the 1940s, although if you met our friend Nick Valentine, you might have some inkling of the kind of things that they was into back then. But once upon a time, there was a gangster woman who was ice cold, and her name was Darla DeRay. She used to carry around this big old submachine gun. And she developed a nickname, the Ice Queen, which was supposed to be some kind of a, you know, hilarious moniker about the way that she treated men. But the truth is that she ended up tricking her machine gun out with free arm bullets, which was nice because, you know, it kind of let people know who had done the crime, and she actually ended up going down for murder because who the hell else had free on-field bullets that were shooting people and shit. So after she'd got the chair, her gun ended up in the evidence locker of the police station over yonder. When the bombs fell, somebody went in there and decided to take that place apart. And they found this here gun, which they ended up taking around to Nuka World to see if it would be more effective against the horrible mutated creatures here, but they all got killed. And the gun fell by the wayside and was eventually ended up thrown into a box, which, unbeknownst to everyone else, turned into a part of the gauntlet that they had down there. And now, god damn it, how many goddamn cave crickets are we gonna fight over here? And now Nikola Tesla is in possession of that weapon, and I suppose we'll see it again someday. And now that might be the story of the freezing submachine gun, but did I ever tell you about this Sentinel synth right arm? Oh shit. The way that this piece of armor works is if you're not moving your body, it sort of locks into place. And I know you're wondering how the hell could a thing like that even be, but the truth is, it's not as crazy as you think. That in fact, it's pretty easy to make an object such as this. It sort of slow dries, and as long as you move around a bit, your body's moisture will slowly loosen up the fibers and the coils inside. But if you hold still for long enough, it'll freeze up. This is one of them bullshit nanotechnologies that they got down there in the Institute. They built this thing and brought the synth up. And while the armor protected his arm and held it in perfect shape, since the end of the Institute being in hiding, they brought it to the surface and somebody decided that they were going to see just how powerful the armor was and ended up cleaning the armor right off of him by knocking his arm off. They carried it around with them for a few minutes before they got bored of it and threw it away. It was one of those people who just likes a challenge, I guess. I don't know, but it's basically pointless to talk about it now because Nikola Tesla ended up finding it. He's carrying it around today, although I think he's going to stick it in an ammo box and forget about it, just like the man before him. Or the duelist leather right leg, which you might expect has a chance to disarm when somebody hits you, and you're wondering how could a thing like that be? Well, it's a pretty ridiculous tale, but I'll tell you anyways. This actually was supposed to be an arm piece. It was somebody who grew up playing Nintendo, I guess, which is some kind of ancient entertainment device, but I guess there was a game on there that had some kind of character that you would play as who had a kind of a, I don't know how you describe it, some kind of spooling grappling hook that they would use to swing from place to place. And this gentleman here, who I guess had grown up in a vault that had one of these devices, and tried to make one himself, but unfortunately his arms were a little bit weirdly shaped, so we mostly wear it on the leg. And while we can't use it to grapple from place to place because he was only 74 pounds and this here string can't possibly hold that much, if you were to press this button here, it would shoot a little grappling coil up, which sometimes can catch the arm of your opponent, and when you stomp back down, it will whip their arm down, which can sometimes knock the weapon out of their hand. It's a fairly interesting way to fight, and I've only ever seen somebody, once or twice learn how to do it. But as you can imagine, the reason that it's in my possession now is that they didn't do a very good job, and they were eventually killed. And now here I am with this strange piece of armor that only the bravest and the most foolish would ever try to learn how to fight with. So there's the story of this duelist leather right leg. This here looked like some kind of a engine, a motorized rocket or something, but the truth is that this is a weapon. It might not look as such, but indeed this thing here is what they call a super sledge. They used to use it all the time when the Brotherhood of Steel and other types of enclave type of people. Neither in no way was it ever more effective than just having a gun so you could keep your distance, but there were occasionally some people who were used to carrying around something like this and swinging it in the faces of their enemies. They had a blood tinge to them that they just couldn't turn down. And in one case, such as this, there was a paladin who used to go into battle with only his power armor legs and nothing else, and the reason that he did this is because he had souped up this here super sledge so that it could swing a little bit harder, a little bit faster, but in return he had to have lower weight on the upper part of him, or else it would counteract the balance of the extra rocket juice that he put in there. So these days we've discovered that if you were just to wear normal armor and use this thing, it would do about the same amount of damage as a normal super sledge. But if you didn't wear any armor at all, it would be able to swing much faster and therefore much harder. And so that's why we continue to use this thing to this day. I don't know if you kids are going to be strong enough to even hold on to the end of this thing. It'd probably go slipping right out of your fingertips, but there is the legend of this here Berserker super sledge. They never expect there to become some kind of robot that would carry around a legendary item such as this, because a robot doesn't have a finger such as to pull the trigger. But sometimes people used to tape these type of things to the backs of robots to protect themselves and to protect their goods. And such was the case with this here sniper rifle. I mean, it's more like a hunting rifle with a scope. So I'm addicted to crystal meth. But anyways, this here gun used to belong to a young man who was just a good old boy from the Ozark Mountains, and he used to go out hunting and whatnot. And he invented a kind of concept for, it's actually really of a magazine modification than anything else, but people don't know that. They just thought it was some kind of magical property of some kind. So what he used to do was, he'd take this here gun out there, and every time he fired it, some of the force that would normally eject the cartridge was put back into the bullet section of the magazine at the bottom, and it would slowly build up pressure like a CO2 cartridge. And then when the final one blew out, it would release all the rest of the gas down the end of the barrel, and the last magazine in the gun would actually kind of give a little bit of kick extra on top of whatever. So normally, you know, the gun does I don't know, this much PSI or whatever, but with the extra force of this here weapon, at the very last bullet in the magazine, it would do, I don't know, extra force, something. I don't know, try it yourself. It kind of, you know, you get a hell of a kickback on the last shot. You'll know when it come out, but it'll knock you right on your ass if you're not expecting it. Anyway, that good old boy, he ended up going to his favorite place in the whole world, Nuka World, when he decided that the world was over and he wanted to spend some time with his family before they all died of radiation. And so they lived out there, and he taped the gun to the back of this robot to try to protect himself. However, one day he was killed by stray robots, and his robot went to the first tank that it could find to try to, you know, upgrade itself or something. And then Nikola Tesla came along and killed that robot and took this gun off of his back. And that is the story of this here defiant sniper rifle. Yeah, the story about the anti-space kid. There was a character from a comic book before the war, but there was a person who was fancying himself to be exactly that character. The anti-space kid. He used to have a gun that in a very strange way in the comics would just fire outer space at people. Of course, nobody explained to the artists of the anti-space kid that he would actually be firing zero of everything, or literally a vacuum, so the man who decided that he wanted to become the anti-space kid designed his rifle to have a tiny device or apparatus or some such on it that would suck all of the air in front of the bullet all the way out, so that it was a perfect conical spiral of vacuum, and then he would fire the gun. It was like a 1-2 thing as part of the trigger function. Now, it didn't really do much. I mean, obviously, sucking all the air out of a tiny cone of space in front of you doesn't do anything, but it actually reduced the wind resistance of the bullet, and he actually had a little bit better accuracy as a result. So he came to prominence about, I don't know, 130 years after the bomb fell as a roving vigilante with an anti-space gun that he used to carry around. But of course, one day he decided he was going to find himself and find the truth about the universe, and he went and joined them herbologists to be running around out there somewhere. He got killed trying to figure out how to get all that zeta radiation in his brain, and went straight to his head and ended up taking him right the fuck out. And so they let his body dissolve on the wayside as the herbologists way, and his gun did not dissolve, but was later picked up for analysis by a robot in the Nuka World area, which was then, as part of a malfunction to its programming, delineated to the junkyard where it suffered and died by the hands of Nikola Tesla about 70-80 odd years later. Well, he found that gun and he didn't do a goddamn thing with it but throw it away. But that there's the legend of this VATS enhanced combat rifle. Well, what do we have here? One of them Institute jobs. Now, of course, you all know that the Institute designed them stupid-ass robots that harass everybody from time to time, but that don't make them more legitimate than any other group in the Commonwealth. They still go from place to place looking for shit to steal, and they steal it, just like the rest of us. And while that's a fine way to operate, generally speaking, they usually use robots to do the job for them, and so they actually have robot arms that are fully built just for breaking into shit, for hacking and for picking locks and God knows what all. And this here is one of them arm pieces that they designed for the synths but modified for the use on a human being, because it turned out that the humans can't pick locks any better than the robots can. So they gave this to one of their old topside groups to try to crack the safes on some Commonwealths, but of course Some people even attach explosive devices to their safes, and this poor soul got the brunt end of one of them, and now he's dead, and his arm piece lay on the wayside because as soon as the explosion went off, all the Institute buddies just up and disappeared, left him alone. And that there's the story of this safecracker's synth arm piece. The Commonwealth ain't just Institute scientists. There are scientists all over the Commonwealth who figured out all kinds of crazy shit from the things that they found in the tattered remains of what used to be the, the general state of the human race and their intelligences up to that point. Well, I say this, they figured out some pretty neat, nifty, solutions, I guess, for the FEV virus. And there was one man in particular, his name was Dr. Jambo, who had figured out a way to kind of reverse the FEV virus a little bit, or at least stymie its progress. And he worked it out using nanobots, the same kind of shit that goes into the old stim packs that you jam yourself with every time you stab your thumb into a card table or something. Well, he loaded up some armor with these nanobots and went out to fight some super mutants, thinking that the only thing that makes super mutants dangerous is the virus that turned them such. And while the super mutants eventually did pull his arms and legs off, there was a strange consequence to his tinkering with things that man should not know anything about. One of those things was that the nanobots was actually reversing the strength of the super mutants as they fought. It prevented him from taking too much damage. Of course, he still did get his arms and legs pulled off, but I thought it was quite an interesting quality of this armor, so I kept it for myself in case I ever have to go fight super mutants. If you want to wear it, you can, but I think it's pretty much garbage. That old doctor, he prized it more than life itself until his life was taken away from him. And that is the legend of these here mutant slaying shadowed right legs. There was once a land of people here who would just go around and killing animals, but they wouldn't even do anything with the bodies. Some of them would take them home and stuff them full of cotton. It used to be that you could just... Quit blowing your arms up! I'm telling a story, goddammit! Used to be that you could have a whole job where you'd take these rich old motherfuckers out into the middle of nowhere and give them a high-powered rifle, and they would just kill an animal and take it home with them, and just the only reason they would do it is to tell their friends or family that they had done it. And they turned out to be some of the biggest pieces of shit who ever lived on Earth, because apart from trying to kill things that were already endangered and maybe was going to destroy the ecosystem and so forth, we ended up having a whole nuclear war to wipe them all off the Earth, so it didn't really matter. But there was one whose name was Windsor Castlesmith O. Jackson. I know that's a pretty unlikely name, but he fancied himself an English dandy, and he had spent out the ass to create one of the most powerful rifles ever to exist. But at this point in time, there was hardly any creatures or animals or anything that was, worth trying to hunt and kill that weren't already in captivity. So he paid off some people at the Nuka World Industries factory to take his gun down to the inside of the bear pit, where he would be hunting one of the most rare and endangered creatures that ever lived, which was the endangered albino polar bear, brown bear. It was a polar bear, but it was also a brown bear. It was just albino, but he didn't fit in with the brown bear squad, so they assigned him to the polar bear pit. But he was rare indeed, and vicious. And when Windsor Castlesmith O. Jackson went down there to kill that bear grabbed him and ripped him to pieces immediately, and ate his bones, and ate his gun, and the body of the violence and hatred toward every other species of poor Windsor Castlesmith O. Jackson seeped into the bones of his gun and filled him with anger and pulsed radiation and mutated the bear into one of the most horrible creatures that ever lived. One day, Nikola Tesla went down into that place and he killed that bear and it exploded and the gun came flying out along with the rest of its guts and entrails. And here we see that indeed, this Hunter's Gas rifle is now infused with the hatred and spirit of Windsor Castle Smith O. Jackson. A little bit before the world exploded, there was a young man by the name of Ajit Pai who...
Klee, this is the last tree they had for sale.
Thank you, Ginger Kid, for that donation. Alright, let's try it. Yeah. There was a... there was a young man by the name of Ajit Pai who worked for the government, and he came up with some rules that didn't really suit everybody very much. But that's not really important. What's important is that he just had one of them faces, you know, one of them faces that was just so desperately easily punchable. Well, nobody really knows about him now, and neither here nor there. It's just his face that's really important because of his association with the federal government. He ended up being on a pack of cards that was supposed to demonstrate to soldiers who was a person of importance in case of nuclear apocalypse. And they had gone through and played cards with them and what all, and it was delivered to various places, including this Federal Rations Depot that's down yonder. And one day, many years later, after the world had ended, the gentleman who took over this area, a bunch of poor-ass raiders that can't be trusted, found the pack of cards, and one of them was so utterly infuriated by the shape of this man's face that he taped it right on the end of this here pipe wrench, which caused everybody who saw it to also become infuriated. So, even though it doesn't look like much of a modification, I mean, damn, it's basically just a sticker on the end of this thing. It ended up making us a legendary weapon in its own right, because, I mean, just look at it. Doesn't that just make you want to kill everybody around you? Yeah, that's exactly what it does. That there is the legend of this enraging pipe wrench.
I'm dumb. I really am dumb. These stories have broken my fucking capacity to play this game. I deserve everything I get and then some.